Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and the mercy and blessings of God be with you all. Thank you all for joining me for this live post in which I discuss the biblical roots of the violence in Israel. Now, before I get into the meat of the topic, I must acknowledge that I see from the comments announcing that this post will happen that this is a very emotional subject for people, and there's been a lot of comments. So I appreciate the interest in the topic. Now, you notice from the topic itself that I'm deciding to talk about biblical roots. Of course, some people are suggesting, well, you should talk about hadith, you should talk about Quran, and so on. Well, let me just remind you that since 9/11/2001, I have been denouncing violent attacks by Muslims on others. And I've gone into the Quran to look at misinterpretations of certain verses, which people use as possible incitements towards violence. I have looked at hadith, and I take a reasonable and balanced approach to hadith between wholesale acceptance and outright rejection. And I've looked at Islamic history, how things came to be put the way they were, how the Prophet, peace be upon him, was misrepresented in Islamic history as though he was actually prone to violence. So I've done all of that already. And in the light of the present crisis, with the news showing, the statistics, so many rockets fired from Hamas and so many people killed in Palestine. Well, you see the large numbers in these statistics. The large numbers are, comparing two different things. One is the number of rockets fired, and the other is the number of people who are killed on the other side. So on the one side, Israel has the Iron Dome. They have protection. They have bomb shelters. The Palestinians, yes, it seems that they have some rockets, which is terrible. We don't want anyone firing rockets at anyone, but look at the numbers. So many people in their bomb shelters on the one side, so many people in their graves on the other side. And this is happening not just once, but it is repeated throughout history. After a lull, there is a new spurt of violence, and then we see in which direction the casualties fall. So in this situation, I want to call for peace, and I want to call for people on both sides to stop the violence. But we, at the same time, need to recognize a certain root of the present injustice, which gives rise to violence. I'm not saying that the violence is excusable or that it should continue. I'm saying that we need to understand a certain root. And today, we can have another discussion in which we talk about denouncing violence among Muslims, looking again at the Quran, the Hadith, Islamic history, and so on. But today, I want to look at the biblical root of this present problem. And I'll put, because there's a lot of content to cover, and I wouldn't even be able to cover all of the content in this, half an hour presentation before I start taking your comments and questions and criticisms, of course. So we need to focus on one thing at a time, otherwise we get nothing done. Everything becomes muddled. So let me put it in a simple way before I get into the biblical material. If I have a quarrel with my neighbor as to, whether the fence between my yard and his is in the right place, should it be moved 3 inches this way or 3 inches the other way? Well, then this is a minor dispute. And, it can be settled fairly easily. Or maybe we might even decide to let it go, 3 inches. If his fence is 3 inches into my yard, you know what? It's not the end of the world. Maybe we can let it pass and we can live with that. Rather than to, have a long, drawn-out court case or anything like this. But let's say, my neighbor thinks that my property is really his. And somehow I started to live in this property, and I have his property, but it's really his. Now, this will lead to a lifelong resentment And the problem of defense now becomes a minor manifestation of that long-standing resentment. It's not just a quarrel over the 3 inches of land space. It's the whole land. He wants the whole land. And, that to begin with, I'm not going to be very comfortable knowing that my neighbor thinks that I live on his property. But, maybe I just shrug it off and say, that's his problem if he thinks that he owns my property. I know I have the title deed to my property. But now, if he is looking for every, excuse to try and get me out of the property so that he can occupy it one more time, then this becomes a long-standing issue. And unless we understand the root of the issue, that this guy thinks that I have his property, then, we won't be able to solve this issue. So to me, this is a large part of it, that the Bible makes it clear that the whole land belongs to the people of Israel. And as long as people are reading the Bibles and they feel that, yeah, this is correct, this is, whom the land belongs to, then they will excuse and they will look for ways in which the Israelites can reclaim some of the land, whether by building in Gaza or building in the West Bank or taking over East Jerusalem, or recently evicting people from Sheikh Jarrah, that little village, and so on. So then the most recently that led to this spate of violence, or that's one of the reasons behind the spate of violence, in that some people were to be evicted from Sheikh Jarrah. I don't know what is the final outcome of that case, but perhaps it has been put on hold in the midst of this violence, so rather than to put more fuel into this fire. So it'll be a good thing for everyone to hesitate and to refuse to put more fuel into the fire. But it's been like seething for a long time, with every new settlement, what are called illegal settlements in the international court. All of this is just adding to the what is like a boiling pot, and eventually the steam will blow. It's only to be expected that eventually this kind of violence will result. And most recently, of course, the way in which the soldiers went into the mosque compound at the Al-Aqsa, which is considered to be sacred by Muslims, and at a time when there is a heightened religious sensitivity, and so on. There's an excellent New York Times article written by, I think it was Frederick. I'll look up the name eventually here. I'll come to it soon enough. But for the moment, I have to confess that I'm not very much schooled in politics, and I don't have much to say in that area. If you ask me the details about which party is ruling Israel and what is their stance and so on, I'm a little bit vague on that. So excuse me in that way. But I'm going to focus on what I do know to a certain extent, and there too, I'm still only a student. I'll be able to speak about the biblical material. There's also an article in the Toronto Star today dealing with a sort of, you might call it an extremist or outlier movement within Israel, where some people, they have been marching in the streets and shouting death to the Arabs, and sometimes inflicting violence on any Arab person they see on the side of the road. So that too is a problem, and that needs to be recognized. So the name of that New York Times article writer is Patrick Kingsley. Patrick Kingsley. Okay. And this morning's Toronto Star, I don't have the writer's name. I can look that up, but it's not so very relevant now. I want to get into the biblical material without delay. And I see a number of you have joined me. I'll get to your comments, after I present some material for another 20 minutes or so. So I want to introduce you to this book. This is a very interesting book by Peter Enns. Peter Enns was trained as he went to Christian seminary. He was training to become a defender of the Christian faith. Eventually, he wrote this book entitled "The Bible Tells Me So." So he is very respectful of his Christian upbringing and tradition. At the same time, he is pointing out that there are certain problems in the Bible that people need to be aware of. And when he came to recognize these problems, he faced three options, three doors, he calls them. One door is to say, okay, we are going to ignore those things, pretend they don't exist. Two is to engage with them. And three is to, let me see if I can remember exactly. Three is to, be honest and say, okay, look, this is a problem here. Let us, let us be very honest about what is said here, and try to find a way to live with this, to explain it in a way that it's no longer a problem. So I don't think I'm putting it exactly the way he put it. You have to read the book yourself. It's not an expensive book, so it's well worth buying. And of course, the knowledge in here is beneficial. All right. So this is where he talks about taking door number 3. Okay. So it's actually in chapter 1. I'll take door number 3. So his exact delineation between the 3 doors, I don't remember exactly to describe it, but it's well worth looking at yourself. Now, one of the Bibles that I recommended during the month of Ramadan when I was doing my book series is this one, the New American Bible, because it has a lot of interesting footnotes and commentary, which can be helpful, especially in a case like this one. Now, the St. Joseph Medium Size Edition has a nice introduction, a nicer one than this one here. It looks like that one was meant more for a general audience, and this one is a little bit more towards a scholarly audience. And so some of the comments there that I like because of their simplicity and directness are not here. But in that introduction to the St. Joseph Medium Size Edition of the New American Bible, the authors or translators do say that there are certain passages in the Old Testament in particular which show the Israelites searching for meaning. And that the search for meaning was inspired, but the results of that search, which is written in the Bible, is not necessarily inspired. And as a case in point, they mentioned the destruction of some ancient cities on the part of the Israelites. And Peter Enns talks about this in his book. He says, look, the Israelites were being commanded in the Bible not only to take over the land of Canaan, but to also deal harshly with the people that they meet on their march towards the land of Canaan. So anyone they meet, those people should be offered terms of peace, and if they do not come to the terms of peace, they should be put to the sword. The men should be, and the women should be taken as captive. So he points us towards Exodus chapter 12, verses 29 to 32. So let me see what is said here in Exodus chapter 29, verses 29. Exodus chapter 12, verses 29 to 32. So we go Exodus chapter 12. So I'm looking at the New International Version translation. So it says, verse number 29, at midnight, the Lord struck down all of the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh. So this is dealing with the Egyptians. So the Israelites were under the Egyptians, and now God is on their side, and God strikes down the Egyptians for them. And then they go to Exodus chapter 14, chapter 32, Leviticus chapter 10, biblical laws to carry out the death penalty. and those Canaanites. Okay, so dealing with the land of Canaan. Deuteronomy chapter 20. So we go to Deuteronomy chapter 20. So Deuteronomy chapter 20 says, going to war. When you go to war against your enemies, that's starting with verse number 1, and see horses and chariots and a great army other than yours. Now let me go to verse number 10, because that's more to the point. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to that city. Then, when the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the city, you may take these as plunder for yourselves, and you may use the plunder the Lord your God gives you from your enemies. This is how you are to treat all the cities that are at a distance from you and do not belong to the nations nearby. Now, however, verse number 16 now, this is the crux of the matter. Verse number 16, however, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. So you see that there are several nations that I mentioned here, the Hivites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They're all to be destroyed, as the Lord has commanded you. And as long as they're in that land in which God has given you as an inheritance. And what is that land that God has given the Israelites as an inheritance? In another passage of the Bible, it is described as being from the Nile to the Euphrates River. So from the Nile to the Euphrates, that includes part of Eastern Africa, like Egypt, certainly Israel, what we call Palestine, part of Arabia, and Syria, part of Iraq. All of this now is supposed to be like under the ownership of the Israelite people, given to them as a title deed. So if you go back to the analogy with me and my neighbor, so I have a title to my land, he has a title to his land, but suppose he says, no, your title is bogus because God gave me the title to your land. So it doesn't matter what government authority gave you your title. I have the God-given, excuse me, I have the God-given title to your land. So now this becomes a major dispute, because how do I dispute with him when he's got the title from God? The only thing we have to ask is, wait a minute, did God sign that for you? Let me see that signature, and let me see if that's really God. So in that sense, we can look at the Bible and ask, is it really God who is saying this, or is it the Israelite people who wrote this in their own favor? And Peter Enns, being a good Christian, the way he explains this, and I appreciate his courage to move away from the standard answers and his attempts to try to make better sense of this. He says, well, when people wrote at that time, these were ancient peoples. They wrote according to the way of thinking of their own time. And this is how people boasted at the time. They boasted that God was with them and God was supporting them. And it's not only the Israelites that boasted in this way. We have the Moabites boasting in the similar way as well. So there's a Moabite inscription that shows that the king Misha, he was supported by God, and he did all of these plunderings and so on. He seized so much land and property and whatever, that this is just proof that God is with him. So people thought like that at that time, and this is how they express themselves. He says it's almost like a schoolyard controversy, like, the boys are each trying to say their father is great. He himself did this. He can recall saying, describing his father in a way that meant that the father is great in terms of what the son thinks greatness means. So for a moment, if we take a pause here, or take a side note to deal with his mother, like, he wouldn't describe his mother in the heroic terms as a child as he would describe his mother when he is an adult. As an adult, he might describe his mother as doing all of this work to take care of all of these kids, cooking and cleaning and doing all of this work while perhaps working outdoors and all of that. So that's heroic to him now. But as a child, that's not how he would have seen it, and he would have described his mother in a different way. Now, describing his father, which was the real, like the more meat of what he wants to explain, is that, he spoke of his father in a way that to a large extent meant him filling in the blanks. He saw his father shoot a rifle once, and hit the bullseye in some sort of game or something like this. And he imagined his father to have been like a mighty marksman, a great warrior in the war. So he described his father to his schoolmates in those terms, because those are the terms which meant to him that his father was great. So, in a similar way, when the Israelites wanted to describe God, they described God and God's greatness in terms that were meaningful to them, and they were not necessarily trying to lie or deceive or anything like this. That's how they wrote it, and of course, they wrote this hundreds of years afterwards. So, when they described all of those dealings with God, they're describing it from the point of view of many generations later on, and that point of view has been questioned. So the Bible goes into great detail showing that after Moses had received these commandments, Moses inflicted a lot of violence on people, and this was followed up by Joshua, his successor, destroying one city after another. And now, when we look at the historical record, the archaeological findings pertaining to these cities, we cannot corroborate the biblical account. Maybe one or two cities can be shown to be, they were destroyed at one time, and probably in the time of Joshua. But some cities were destroyed, but not in the time of Joshua, much later. Some cities were not even inhabited at the time, but the Bible says that they were destroyed under Joshua. So the archaeology and the biblical story do not quite add up. Another book that deals with this discrepancy is this one. I haven't read the entire book, and I looked at some relevant pages a long time ago. And in preparation for this presentation today, I wish I'd read the whole thing, but nonetheless, I'll recommend it. It's called Historical Israel, Biblical Israel by Mary Ellis. So it's a very interesting study of the discrepancy that exists between, on the one hand, what is known from history, and on the other hand, what the Bible is saying. Now, all these passages that speak about the destruction of all of these cities on God's command. Well, that becomes a major problem for Christians today. And many Christians have risen to the fore to try and defend God on that score, because some atheists have described God as a moral monster, partly because of these statements in the Bible where God commands the destruction of these whole cities. So I'd like to show you a couple of books. So one of them is by Paul Copan, Is God a Moral Monster? So he's defending God, he says, making sense of the Old Testament God. And Paul Copan also teamed up with Matthew Flanagan to write this one, Did God Really Command Genocide? So you see, they're taking whole books to explain this problem and dealing with this, coming to terms, the subtitle says, Coming to Terms with the Justice of God. It's hard to see the subtitle there. Maybe we'll see it on the title page, Coming to Terms with the justice of God. So basically, they, in addition to trying to understand the biblical statements in a way that will not make God look bad, they also look at the history and the archaeology, and they say, yeah, it looks like the destruction was not as thorough as the Bible describes. So God is not so bad. But then that calls into question another issue, as Peter comes to admit. Well, then it means that the writers of the Bible did not represent God correctly by saying that God commanded all of these cities to be destroyed, and then they were not destroyed. Now, those other writings, which I just showed you, by Paul Copan and his co-author, they're trying to say, okay, this is an Old Testament view of God. But, in the New Testament as well, we find, I'm just going to look up the verse here, we find that there is there is an acknowledgement that God destroyed, and they usually mention 7 cities, so are 7 nations. I'm going to look up the verses that may have sent me. So Acts chapter 13, verse 19, it speaks about the 7 nations, and he overthrew 7 nations in Canaan, giving their land to his people as their inheritance. So who was saying this? So this is in the New International Version of the Bible, and it looks like Paul is saying this. Yeah, Paul is saying this. Paul says in chapter 16, standing up, Paul motioned with his right hand and said, Paul motioned with his hand and said. So Acts of the Apostles is describing the activities of Paul. And in verse number 16 of chapter 13, the writer of Acts says, standing up, Paul motioned with his hand and said, fellow Israelites, and you Gentiles who worship God, listen to me. God of the people of Israel chose our ancestors. He made the people prosper during their stay in Egypt with mighty power. He led them out of that country. For about 40 years, he endured their conduct in the wilderness, and he overthrew 7 nations in Canaan, giving their land to his people as their inheritance. All this took about 450 years. So we see that there is an acknowledgement and an approval of all of this activity in the New Testament by the New Testament writers and speakers and heroes and models. Paul being the primary one among them. So this becomes a problem for the New Testament as well, because the New Testament is acknowledging that violence and approving of it. Now, as Peter N. says, this is, a command to go kill off those people and take away their land. And this is different from what most Christians want to adhere to. Most Christians want to adhere to the teachings which are reported of Jesus, where he says, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, turn the other cheek. So instead of, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you and turn the other cheek, the command in the Old Testament was to go kill off the enemy and take their land. So this is a very different command, and it becomes one of the major problems for Christians. So for our topic today, what I'm saying is that we need to understand this root. And as long as people are reading their Bibles and they're thinking, well, yeah, this is what God commanded us in the first instance, we should have taken away this whole land and we should have killed off all of those people in the past. Well, now, people are still around and they still control the land, and land really belongs to us. So we have the title deed to it. Where's the title deed? Right here in our Bibles. The Bible says that the land belongs to us. So when people are thinking like that, then naturally they will ignore the international conventions. They will ignore international law. They will go set up what international law considers to be illegal settlements. They will try to annex and keep East Jerusalem, even though, according to international law, this was seized during the 1967 war, and it should be returned to its people after the war is over, and so on. So people will say, okay, we have the title deed. It's in our Bible. This is given to us by God. We're not going to return it just because some people say we're supposed to return it, whether they're the International Court of Justice or whatever it is. We just don't care. And so this lack of care has been leading to illegal settlements in West Bank and elsewhere. Probably some of that is behind the need to evacuate people from or evict them from Sheikh Jarrah and so on. So the rest of this is all superficial. It's like me and the neighbor quarreling over 3 inches of property line. Whereas the neighbor thinks that my whole property is really his. So this quarrel over the 3 inches might not have even mattered. The neighbor might have said, okay, you're 3 inches into my land. I can shrug that off and live with that. It's not a big deal. But if the neighbor thinks that my whole land belongs to him, well then, this is a real problem, and that will lead to a lifelong dispute with many minor manifestations of that. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the peace in Palestine and in elsewhere. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect the Palestinian people. And I call for an end to violence. I want peace. I want negotiations. I want, justice. And everyone recognizes that a peace without justice that depends on people accepting. If my neighbor's property is 3 inches if my neighbor's fence is 3 inches into my property, and I decide to live with that, nobody should come and tell me, no, you're not allowed to accept that. You should insist that your property line is exactly demarcated by the fence. But if I want to give up 3 inches of my land to the neighbor, well, then that's between me and the neighbor. Nobody else has a right to dictate to me what I can and cannot give away. But if the situation is such that the neighbor is trying to claim my land and is doing all kinds of things against me because he thinks that he owns my land, and I'm trying to resist his encroaches, starting with the 3 inches of fence into my land, then why should people complain because I'm trying to resist and trying to defend my land and to hold off this aggressor? So this in part explains the Palestinian response. It does not justify all of the violence and placing people in so much danger and causing the loss of so many Palestinian lives. But the greater call for restraint has to be with the greater power. We have to expect of the greater power that they should still stop killing people on the other side. If two armies go to battle and they're killing each other, and we're saying to them, okay, stop, both of you, you're wrong. Okay, because you're killing your people. It's senseless. But the killing seems to be mostly on the other side. So if we have, 200 rockets fired by Hamas, we have 200 Palestinians dead. Meanwhile, you will hear of, the poor Israelites cowering in their bomb shelters. Yeah, they shouldn't have to cower in their bomb shelters. But think about the Palestinian people. Palestine, the Gaza Strip in particular, is a narrow strip. In Toronto, I have to think of this as being from St. Clair Avenue all the way to Lake Shore. Well, when we say all the way, it's not a far way from St. Clair to Lake Shore. So when a bomb is dropped in one area, it affects the whole land. People can hear the bomb. It's frightening, especially for children. And, the bomb can drop anywhere. Within the last couple of days, a bomb dropped on a building that housed media outlets. So the Al Jazeera a media outlet and Reuters was in there. Now their operation is in shambles. So how are we going to get unbiased and fair news from that region about the atrocities which are being inflicted upon the Palestinian people? So there's no telling where the bomb will drop next, and sometimes the bomb drops on a house. And so the Palestinian people are naturally frightened. People of Gaza have been splitting up. The families are splitting up as a survival strategy. They go to stay in other people's houses so that you don't keep the entire family in one house, because if a bomb drops on that house, that's the entire family gone all at once. But the alternative is also not a very bright future to live with. It's the idea is that you split up into various houses. So if that one house is bombed, maybe one of your relatives is in there, but the other relatives are safe in other homes. So that means that while you have decreased the chance of your entire family going all at once, you have increased the chance that at least one of you will die. And you see how terrible this is. The options are not very good options for the people of Gaza. So the world has to look into this and call for an end to the violence, but the world has to call for justice as well, so that this long-standing problem of people trying to take away the Palestinian land, this should end. And for that to end, it seems to me that people have to be able to go back to their Bibles and say, well, this was written by people a long time ago who thought that way, as Peter Enns is explaining in this book. The Bible tells me so. So people thought like that a long time ago, but it ain't so. And, and in fact, from an archaeological point of view, we can see that it ain't so. It wasn't so. The many cities that were said to be destroyed by Joshua, the successor of Moses, does not get corroborated by the archaeological and historical evidence. So I bring my talk here to a close by reiterating what I said at the beginning. Yes, we could have had another topic dealing with, what causes some Muslim terrorists to rise to violence. We could, analyze verses of the Quran, which I've done before. We can analyze hadith and explain the balanced approach towards hadith, which I've done before. We can talk about the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, how the Prophet, peace be upon him, came to be represented in the seerah as a violent person. But all of that I've done before and in a different context. And of course, I could, as early as next week, go back to doing all of that again if there is a need for it. But I think I've done a lot of that on our television broadcast and so on. I haven't done enough of showing the biblical roots of the current crisis. And I hope that I've done a little bit of justice to that today. Still, we needed more time even to deal with that in more detail. But it gives you some food for thought and some matters to discuss. And hopefully, if people pay attention to this, we could actually end this problem with people deciding to live in peace. But if somebody says that your land is my land, well then, we are in trouble. So I ended right there for what I wanted to present one way, and now I want to look the other way and look at your questions and comments. So, okay. So Zakaria Yasin, assalamu alaikum, brother. Wa alaikum assalam. Saad, wa alaikum assalam. And waiting for a great history class. I'll go. Thank you, Saad. Keep praying for me. And someone who calls himself Fathead Rat, what a funny name, says salam. And Zara Shamim says assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam. And Tahir Mahmoud says salam, wa alaikum assalam. Dennis, hello, thanks for making a video with such a topic. Thank you, Dennis. And Joyce Taylor, assalamu alaikum, and wa alaikum assalam. And so tragic, Joyce adds. And yes, I agree. And Makoria says salam, alaikum salam. Saeed Munawar sends love back to you, my brother. And Joyce Taylor, ignorance is never going to end. Yes, you're right. Some people will always be there, not bothering to learn. Farhan saying salam, alaikum salam, and stay always blessed. You too, my brother Farhan. And Marshall Gregory, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yahi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you as well, my brother Marshall. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And Pamela saying, Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh, wa alaikum assalam, my sister. And Farhan saying, regarding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, I think it states Arabs and Jews are children from Ishmael and Isaac of Abraham. Both acknowledge it. Would the Ten Commandments not apply from the Jewish viewpoint, specifically, thou shalt not kill, steal, etc. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing, that the Bible on the one hand commands people, "Thou shalt not kill," really, actually, "Thou shalt not murder." But as for killing, there are other instructions that say, "Go and take this land," and you've heard the statements from Deuteronomy chapter 20. Okay, Nadim Ali Shah Jilani, what is a good book to understand the Israel and Palestine conflict, its history, and to explain that Muslims are the oppressed? Before I answer your question, Nadim, I realize that I have to keep looking at sideways to see the comments. So I'm going to move this tab to a more central location under my camera so that I don't have to always keep looking away. So a good book to understand the Israel and Palestine conflict, its history, and so on. The Idiot's Guide to the Middle East Conflict. I think that's a good one. It's a bit dated now, but there may be, an update. Maybe they published a new edition. I found that to be a good and reasonable introduction to the problem. That will be a good starting point, and then you will see references to other books and so on that you can pursue in more the subject by reading in more detail. Okay, Dennis. Willis Sachs. Okay, sorry, I won't even try, Dennis. I know I did before, and you might have schooled me on how to pronounce your surname, but I forget all of that schooling. Sorry about that. But Dennis, okay, the Jews seem to believe that they are still the chosen people of God, but the Jewish temple was destroyed in the year 70 A.D. Matthew 21:43 says, "This is why I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and be given to a nation producing its fruits." Interesting point, Dennis. I hadn't thought about that in great detail, but it's interesting that, Dennis, I know you're a Christian and you have that view. I think that some other Christians have the idea that they must support Israel because Israel does, have this right, and at least they think that Israel must remain in place or must be in place for the second coming of Jesus. But, correct me on that. I'm a little bit vague on that subject right now. So Farhan saying, "I think stealing land, destroying lives, and diverting resources to one group of people is immoral and unethical. Allah will not be pleased with such actions." I agree with you, Brother Farhan, and I wish that more people will come to the same understanding. And my brother who is writing to me, maybe using Amharic, I don't know that language. Nonetheless, here is what he says. "Many thanks. I really benefit from your knowledge, and may Allah reward you abundantly. I am Muhammad Dashirovic. So that's what you must have written in Amharic there, if I'm right in thinking and guessing that's Amharic. Okay, so my brother Muhammad, thank you for those kind words. Keep making dua for me. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and all of the people around you and bless us all. Asghar Ali, I don't agree that what Israel has done with Palestinian or what Palestinians to Israel, but you have again misrepresented biblical teaching. Okay, so Asghar, tell me, what have I misrepresented? Because I read the passage out of Deuteronomy chapter 20, starting with verse number, I think it was 10, verse number 10, close to towards almost the end of that chapter. So please tell me what I've misrepresented. And Asghar Ali, if I quote Quranic verses, yeah, if you quote them in their context and so on, we can study them. Let's hear them. So Allah, Asghar Ali is adding, Allah commands at least 36 times in the Quran to kill the idolaters, Jews and Christians, 165 times for jihad. Being obedient to Allah, Muhammad and his disciples killed thousands of people. For example, Quran 2:16, fighting, qatilu is prescribed for you. 489, slay, yuqatilu them wherever you find. 936, fight, qatilu the idolaters utterly. 244, fight in the way of Allah. Surah 9, verse 12, fight the leaders of unbelief. And Surah 9, verse 123, O believers, fight the unbelievers who are near you and let them find in you harshness. Now, you can see, my brother Asghar Ali, that none of these verses say, go, kill off the people and take their land in that way in which the Bible is speaking. See, you must understand that what we're speaking about when we talk about the destruction of the nations and the taking away of the land is that Abraham is said to have been born, according to the Bible, in the Ur of the Chaldeans, and then this is somewhere, along the the Tigris, the Euphrates River, somewhere along the Euphrates River, somewhere in what is now Iraq. And then he is called by, he moves up to go to Haran, up in the north. And then God calls him to go down into the land of Canaan. So now he's going to go down into the land of Canaan. And God is promising him all of this land of Canaan as belonging to his descendants. And then it is said further that his descendants will be counted from the line of Isaac. So now the Israelites, who are the descendants of Isaac, they're thinking that they own this land. And they are being commanded under Moses now to go into that land, to march towards it. And along the way, wherever they meet a people, they're to offer them terms of peace. If they submit, yes, to enslave them all. If they don't submit, you kill the men, you enslave the women and the children anyway. And you take away their what remains. You become the owners there. You're going to live in their land if you choose to. But your ultimate goal is the land of Canaan. Now you come to the land of Canaan. When you reach the land of Canaan, this is the land that God has given you for the inheritance. What do you do now? You kill off everything that breathes, and that's what the passage said. So this is a serious command. So these are people who are just living there. It's not saying that there's a war between you and them. It just says you go there, you just kill them off, take their land, and it's yours because God has promised you that. Now, the verses that you've quoted from the Quran, this is all in the context that should be understood. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, lived for 13 years in Mecca. He wasn't fighting anybody. He was just preaching a message. People were beating up on him and his followers. They tried to take his life. He left that scene. He went to settle peacefully in Medina. But the enemy did not leave him alone. They came in one army after another to battle with the Muslims. So the first battle at Badr, which is near Medina. Second battle, major battle, is at Uhud, which is just at Medina itself. So that when pilgrims go to visit Medina today, they take a short bus ride for a few minutes. They go to Uhud, where the martyrs of Uhud remain buried. They make dua, or they pray for them. So this was right there. And then the next major battle, if you can call it the battle, is the Battle of Khandaq, the Battle of the Trench, or the Battle of the Allies, because so many Allied forces joined with each other to attack the Muslims at that time that they could very easily have wiped out all of the Muslims. So the Muslims were practicing defensive battle here. And in that context of being in a defensive battle situation, now the Quran is giving them commandments to fight. It's almost like an army general in the heat of battle. He's telling his troops, go, kill them, fight, shoot. So in saying that, the army general is not telling them to go and attack innocent people and take away their land. No, he's telling them what to do when you are in that battle situation. So here we are in an ongoing war between the Muslims and the non-Muslims, and the Muslims are being told, this is how you behave. You are going to fight, okay? So fighting is prescribed for you in the sense that it has come upon you. You didn't bring it upon yourselves. It is here. You have to accept as a fact, and then you have to be brave, because if you're not brave within the battle, then you are going to be you're going to be killed off, and then your women and children will be left defenseless. So the men had to rise to the occasion. They had to be brave. They had to fight fiercely while they're in the battle. But to pick a battle, to pick a fight, to go and rob people of their houses and so on, this is not in the Quran. So all of them. Surah 4, verse 89. If you read what is in the context, even if we start with the previous verse, Surah 2, verse 216, read the wider context. Surah 2, verse 190 says, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا. Fight in the way of God against those who are fighting you, but do not be aggressors, because إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. God does not like those who are aggressors. So the whole context shows that it's not the same as what is there in the Bible. It's very, very different. And we can go to all of these verses. You quoted from Surah 9, but quote Surah 9, verse number 6, which says, وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ اسْتَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرْهُ حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ ثُمَّ أَبْلِغْهُ مَأْمَنَهُ ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. If some of the polytheists were to come seek refuge with you, grant him refuge, so that if one of the polytheists, then grant him refuge, so that he may hear the words of God and then transport him to a place where he will be safe. So this calls for the safety of the enemy and their protection and even their welcoming within the Muslim society as refugees. And then in the end, if they don't want to listen to God's words and they don't want to become Muslims, you're to transport them to a place where they will be safe. So you're to ensure their safety in the end. It's not that you're to kill every one of them. So yeah, you can take a verse out of context and make it mean a violent outcome, but putting them in the context, you see that the Quran is not a violent book. It's calling for peace, it's calling for fairness, it's calling for justice. Now, go back to the biblical verse. It's not out of context here. It is exactly within the context. We have read the whole passage and we have seen clearly what it is saying. It's going into great detail as opposed to the Quran, which gives you a little bit here and a little bit there. You have to join all these verses to make sense of them. But the biblical narrative is continuous. It's showing that Moses and his people are marching and God is giving them the marching orders. This is what you do with the people you meet on the way. You force them into slavery. If they resist, you kill the men, take the women and children as slaves anyway. And then when you come to the land of Canaan, this is what you do. You kill everything that breathes. In one passage, it even says you gather everything in the open square and you have this huge bonfire as a burnt offering to God. You burn the entire city to the ground. So this is a very different story. So no, I haven't misrepresented the Bible. I don't see. And if you think I have, then Azhar Ali, please show me how exactly I have. Just like I've explained the Quranic context, you explained the biblical context. But as I've said, we have here writers who have been trying to explain this, and I know of their explanations, but their explanations do not really get rid of the problem. And, as Peter Enns says, we just have to, come to terms with this. We just have to accept that this is what ancient writers wrote when they wrote what seemed good to them and fair and right. But it doesn't seem fair and right to us. We should acknowledge that. Okay. Norris Blandford the third. Thank you for joining. Good afternoon, Doctor, and good afternoon to you. Allah enjoying Isaac and Ishmael. So your statement there is a little bit incomplete, it seems to me. It says so in the Quran. Allah enjoined Isaac and Ishmael. You mean that they were both prophets and we respect them all? I agree with you. Okay, Fuad, Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh, and wa alaikum assalam. Eli Cohen, Shalom. I've listened to your presentation. If only it was as simple to resolve as you suggest. May we see peace soon. Thank you, Ali. And yes, sometimes things are not so simple. And naturally, I've tried to bracket things and put it in a simple way. But things are very complex. I agree with you, and I do pray with you for peace. Yes. And Nasir Ahmad, assalamu alaikum, alaikum salam. Saad Ahmed, main Israeli leaders are secularists. They are using Bible like ISIS interpretation of Islam. Jews reject the land. Okay, thank you, Saad, for that addition. And yes, we can see that there is extremism to deal with as another factor. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Muhammad Ali, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran, and thank you. Please keep praying for me. And Jazakallah khairan. And Norris Blandford, the third, Dr. Shabir was so young when he debated with Jay Smith. You look like you had a lot of fun with that night. Doctor, I watched the whole debate. So maybe you're thinking of the one where there is who was the MC? It was a woman. I forget her name for the moment. But yeah, that was a memorable debate. Perhaps that was in the year 2000 in Atlanta. That was a memorable debate. Do share it. And by the way, and one final comment here from Mu'tasim, saying, thank you, Dr. Shabir, for your highly beneficial talk. Thank you, my brother Mu'tasim. And my brothers and sisters and friends, please support the work I do by a financial donation, a big or small one. Go to our website, islaminfo.com. There you'll find the donation options. Please donate to a category of your choice, whether it is zakat or some other category that you choose. But please do help and support the work that we do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, every dollar counts. So don't think that your donation is too small. There are several people watching this. So if each person gives $1, that adds up to something substantial in the end. So thank you all for joining me. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring peace in Israel and everywhere else. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect the Palestinian people. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give the status of martyrdom to those who have died in this recent conflict, a large number of them already. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them and stop the blood of the Muslims from flowing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring peace so that all people are protected, Muslims and non-Muslims. We don't wish anything bad to happen to anyone, and we pray for all people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you and us from COVID-19, from every other disease and sickness and distress and stress. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring us better times, happier moments, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite us all under the shade of His throne on the day of judgment. Thank you all for joining. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Oh, and one last thing I should mention to you. In a week's time, I will be debating with Anthony Rogers. That's going to happen next Saturday, inshallah, in the afternoon, in the late afternoon. It's 5 p.m. It's going to be 5 p.m. Toronto time. That's Eastern time. I'll get the poster and post it on my Facebook page, so you'll have all of the details and the link where to watch that debate live. But the debate will be on two topics. One is can we trust the biblical view of Jesus, and two, can we trust the Quranic view of Jesus? So watch for that next Saturday, inshallah. And in the meantime, on Friday, I'll be doing my live Friday sermon and also leading the prayer virtually. So join me for that, if you, especially if you're in the Toronto area and you do not have access to pray in one of the mosques, because the mosques are largely closed now, are very limited in terms of capacity. So you can join me virtually, at least to listen to the khutbah, even if you think that praying virtually is not allowed. So in any case, I would love to see you both for my Friday sermon and also for the debate with Anthony Rogers. So Jazakumullah khairan. Pray for me. Pray that the debate goes well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me the grace to say the right thing to the right people in the right way and at the right moment. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you for joining. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.